Well, it's the big show. Was that good? Was that good? Did you like that? Did I nail it?
Yeah,
all right. So the big show is who we're talking about in this video. Born Paul Donald Wight II on February 8th, 1972. It's a good thing I caught that in my notes because there's a typo in there and it says 1872. That would not be correct. So, I actually have my own personal stories with Paul Wight, a.k.a. The Big Show, that we're going to get to at the end of this video, but we're going to jump right in here, and I'm going to ask Alan this question. How big do you think he was at age 12?
Age 12, I would probably say he was almost 7 feet.
Not quite, but he was very large for a 12-year-old. He was 6'2", 220 pounds.
I was way off.
That is an inch taller than me and about 30 pounds heavier than me at 12 years old. So he was born with acromegaly. That's a disease of the endocrine system that causes accelerated growth. Pretty much any famous giant person has had this, like Andre the Giant and Richard Kiel. Do you know who Richard Kiel is?
Yeah. Jaws?
Yeah! What other movie was he in?
Happy Gilmore?
Yeah, there it is. I mean, he was in a lot more movies than that, but that was the one that I was hoping for. He plays Mr. Larson. He plays the former boss, the one that takes the nail to the head. Oh, and then and Shooter's like, I had to hit it off Frankenstein's fat foot over there. I watched an old clip of Richard Kiel on David Letterman back in the day, and he seemed like just like the nicest guy on the planet. Like, he just seemed so cool. And so stinking big, man. Like, just absolutely gigantic. Well, going back to the Big Show here, he underwent successful surgery in the early 90s to halt his growth. Now, here's some other crazy stats about the Big Show. His shoe size, 22 5E.
Wow.
So sit and think about that one. This reminded me of back in the mid-90s when Shaq first came out with his Reebok line of shoes. In a lot of the stores where they sold these, they had an example of his shoe size. It was just one shoe. It didn't pair him up. And I remember just how gigantic it was for like 14, 15-year-old Brandon, where I think my head almost fit in it. That's how big these shoes were. So that's a big-ass shoe. His ring size is 22. I got skinny-ass, like, long fingers. I want to say my ring size is like 8.
Is that measured circumference-wise?
Yeah.
Holy
now here's the big
cow.
one. Now here's the big circumference. His chest is 64 inches in circumference.
Damn.
He is a large man. And at some point, I may have already thrown the picture up. See, here's the thing. I don't really plan out when I put the pictures up as we're recording these, so I might have already put the picture up of me shaking his hand. Hopefully I haven't yet, so it can kind of come up later in the old program here. And there's also another show of me sitting front row. It was Survivor Series 2010 was where I was at, but we're going to get to that here in just a minute. But do you know who introduced the Big Show to Hulk Hogan, eventually leading to his career in wrestling?
I'll go out on a limb and just say Jimmy Hart.
No, was not even a wrestler. Danny Bonaducci.
I didn't even know Danny Bonaducci and Hulk Hogan were friends.
Well, I guess they were, at least in some way, shape, or form. And it was because Danny Bonaducci had a live microphone amateur contest on his morning radio show, and Paul Wight had come in and ended up kind of, basically, that was kind of his big unveiling to the world on a public forum, and then Danny Bonaducci ended up introducing him to Hulk Hogan. There's another story here that I forgot to write down that had to do with how he ended up in the WCW, because it kind of got to the point where I think at this time Hogan had already jumped ship. He was already a part of WCW. They had an informal basketball game as a part of the WCW promotion for an upcoming show at the Rosemont Horizon. Hogan liked how Wight worked the crowd and recommended him to World Championship Wrestling's vice president, Eric Bischoff. Wight went to the Horizon show. He was invited into the locker room where he met with Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Paul Orndorff. God, I can never say his name. Orndorff. I always get tongue-tied on that one. So he ended up at WCW first. But WWE/WWF, Wight had tried to get in with them before, but his tape ended up sitting. I'm going to make sure I got this correctly. Pat Patterson, he didn't bother watching the video because he assumed that Wight was a completely different wrestler named Kurgan. And this ended up this really kind of pissed off Vince McMahon because we missed out on this guy because you just wouldn't watch his cassette tape or his videotape because you thought it was somebody else. So that's the weird story about how Paul Wight ended up in WCW.
Well, funny enough, they hired Kurgan. And Paul Wight ended up in WWE eventually. So.
He did. Yeah, he did. And so I got a couple of personal stories about him. The first one, it's not my own interaction with him, but there was a guy that I used to play poker with. His name's Clay Reese, whose brother was Big Daddy Reese. If you watched WCW, The Flock, back in the late...
He's part of Raven's Flock, yeah.
Back in the late 90s. And he was also the one that Goldberg perfected the jackhammer on. Because I guess when they were training, he wanted to make sure that he could do it to the biggest guy possible, and Big Daddy Reese was 7'1". Clay, being the runt of the family, and I'm doing this, because he was still 6'8", 250 pounds. He played offensive lineman for Washington State. And Clay would go down to Atlanta and hang out with a lot of the wrestlers because obviously his brother was one of the WCW wrestlers. And one of the stories he told us was that the Big Show was a chain smoker.
Yes.
But the problem was his fingers and hands were so big he could only smoke a half a cigarette. Because by the time he got to half a cigarette, it was already burning the outside of his fingers because they were so goddamn thick, he couldn't smoke the rest of the cigarette. And it just blew my mind when he told me that story. So now, future Brandon, put up the picture. This will be the picture now of me over here, chatting with the Big Show when we were down in Florida. And again, this was 2010. And you can see just how giant his hand is. Again, I'm 6'1". So do the height difference there. And he came in to do an interview. They were promoting Survivor Series. This was always one of the really cool things about being in South Florida at this time, was towards the end of the year, we almost always got a pay-per-view or some sort of WWE event down there. And this time it was Survivor Series. And we ended up sitting front row for this event. And I was standing at the very, so the ramp that they go down when they're being introduced, I was, if you're going from their point of view, I was on their right, very front row. If you watch the pay-per-view, you can actually see me. I'm wearing a green Oregon Duck shirt. And I'm linking below a video of somebody who was also there and filmed the Big Show's entrance. It was all of Team Mysterio. It was the 6-man
Survivor Series.
Yeah,
it was a Survivor Series match.
Yeah. And so so the Big Show comes out, and the interesting thing is when you watch that video, again, it's going to be linked down below. When you watch this video, he comes over to me and he high fives me, and you can see me all yeah, I was just it was awesome. It was great because almost every other wrestler, the side that we were on, it's not the TV side.
Yeah,
where all the cameras, all the cameras are behind us. So every other wrestler is playing to that crowd on the other side because that's where the cameras are filming. I remember standing there and I kind of leaned out and made eye contact with him. And I'm because I met him the day before. I don't know if he actually recognized me or not, but I was I was very animated at that time. So I'm yeah. And he comes over and he gave me a high five. I was the highlight of the damn night. And there's a couple other pictures that I'll toss up right now too that are from maybe one other picture that came from that night of Survivor Series. I still have the chair too, man. I need to take a picture of the chair that you get to keep when you go sit down.
Is that
on the
one
floor.
is that the one against the wall? No.
Well,
your Survivor Series chair.
Oh no, there's no chair behind me. No, they're all.
I was that looks kind of like a chair. It's a pillow.
No, that's a pillow. That's a pillow right there. But those are my stories about the Big Show. If you have any interesting stories about the Big Show, aka Paul Wight, please comment down below. We like it when you guys get involved. The future videos coming up here, we're going to be talking about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. we're on a brief hiatus when it comes to the history of rock. I'm just trying to figure out some things that we actually are going to be discussing when it comes to that. I know I've been postponing the Humpty Dance that Alan and I were going to be talking about for the longest time. So these are all future videos. So make sure you're clicking the like button down below, the little thumbs up. You're subscribing, and then also clicking the bell so you get the notifications for when basically you get when new videos pop up, or when we try to go on live and we struggle with phasmophobia not functioning properly in the VR headset.
Yes.